The documentation, you don't need it until you need it. It's not in the forefront of your mind until something happens. Those are the things that you need. They're going to help keep you out of trouble or minimize that effect of that citation.
Welcome to episode 6 of the Steel and Dirt podcast, where we discuss everything related to heavy equipment and construction methods. And today we're talking with Shannon Dennis, who is the Senior Safety Specialist and Training Development Manager at Safety Consultants USA. Shannon has over 20 years' experience in the safety field, working with both construction and manufacturing clients. She holds the Safety Trained Supervisor for Construction, or STSC designation from the Board of Certified Safety Professionals, and has completed the General Industry Certificate Program from the University of Alabama. Roll Tide. All right. We're here today to talk about job site safety and OSHA, so it sounds like we're talking to the right person. And thank you for being with us, Shannon, and welcome to the podcast.
All right, thank you for having me.
So tell us just a little about how you got into the safety field.
It was actually like many safety professionals, kind of by accident. So I started out in college in operations management, so qualified to manage a manufacturing facility, and then took some time off to raise some kids, and then just kind of fell into first aid training and really enjoyed it and realized that safety was a part of everything I had done and in my career, and just seemed like a natural progression after that. So started taking some classes at Alabama and went through their certificate program and owned a company for about 8 years that's still in business in Alabama, and then moved through changes in life, ended up here. So
tell us a little bit about Safety Consultants USA and what you guys offer to the public.
We are based in Atlanta, Georgia, but we work nationwide. We have clients in general industry, construction, all over the place. We typically take on retainer clients that we will help manage their whole safety program, perform a certain number of audits. Depending on their size, it may be annually, or it may be several a month. And then we do tons of training. And so training is kind of where I like to be, where I'm comfortable with training classes, but we do the OSHA 10 and 30-hour classes, as well as we primarily focus on OSHA compliance. So in my past, I've done some MSHA compliance as well. We do some DOT, and then our construction side is we have some clients we do continuous audits, continuous training, so 10, 15 a month, depending on what their needs are. We also assist with a lot of OSHA abatements. So if somebody comes to us because they have either had a severe injury, fatality, or a visit from OSHA, we will assist them in getting the proper documentation, going to the informal conferences, making the settlements, helping them out with the settlements and things like that.
So for a second, let's look at the construction/contractor side. When these folks come to you, what's the number one thing they're looking for usually?
It depends, but typically it's audits and training. And so a lot of times clients come to us because either their insurance rates, their EMR is high. They need to get that down so that they can get on certain job sites, or they've had some injuries and they need to get that down because, as we know, the workman's comp cost of injuries can eat up your profits. So, and you have to be safe to stay competitive. With the smaller contractors, a lot of times, if they're doing certain types of work, they will have to go through third-party qualification systems and trying to meet those qualifications. That would be their EMR below 1 and keeping their incident rates to an acceptable level is usually the goal.
So, their knowledge when they come to you on safety, is it just general and you guys are taking them to the next level to get them more aware? Because I get what you're talking about with they come to you when there's an unfortunate incident or whatever. But in general, when they come to you, are they just not aware of everything, or they're just kind of barely dip their toe in, or where are they at?
It depends, because we have clients that are larger GCs that have world class safety programs that just need some additional help with site audits and training, because they don't have enough safety people to be everywhere at once. And then with the smaller construction companies, a lot of times it's we do everything for them. So we'll manage their safety program and their training, help them with pre-qualifications, site-specific plans. So it really can go in any direction depending on what their needs are.
When they're outsourcing a lot of that, and I get it. I mean, with manpower and trying to get people hired, trying to get people to volunteer to help to do things. When they're outsourcing this stuff, does the focus stay as high when they are less involved, or is it better if they have some people involved?
It's always better if they have people involved, because we want management commitment from the top, and that's always going to flow better with your safety culture and help build your culture if everybody's involved. And it's got to be kind of multifaceted, from the managers on down to your superintendents and everybody on site. And even the best companies will take on the culture of the job that they're on. And so a lot of times you'll see, if you walk through the gate and people are slack on their personal protective equipment or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
then they'll tend to take on those habits. and
Mm-hmm.
and again, it's, if you can create those good habits from the very beginning with your people, um, then a lot of times they stick, they see the benefit of it. So
In general, um, documentation to me would probably be a huge challenge with a lot of companies, especially the smaller companies. Is that a huge part of what you guys do?
absolutely, with training records are one of the most difficult, and typically the documentation, you don't need it until you need it. And so it's not in the forefront of your mind until something happens and you say you have an OSHA inspection or an injury, and they ask for um, your past 5 years of your OSHA logs. They ask for training documents and written programs, and those are the things that you need. They're going to help keep you out of trouble or minimize that effect of that citation. Is being able to show that you have done everything that you can, and you can't prove that you've done it unless it's documented. And so managing those training documents and the written programs, because a lot of times people will have a very good program, but if it sits on a shelf and is not reviewed and not implemented properly, then things fall by the wayside.
I know site audits are a big deal with both construction and manufacturing, whichever. Anywhere I've been, there were weekly audits, monthly audits, quarterly audits. Are there different types ways you guys do that? Maybe the companies or the contractors are doing the smaller audits and you're going in behind them monthly or quarterly. Do you do some of that as well?
A lot of times we do. So we can do we typically will do a thorough audit of and again, it depends on the contractor. So if it's a GC, we may be auditing the whole project. But if we're looking at just one of the contractors, then we're just looking at whatever that task is that they're performing. But and again, it depends on how the contract's set up. But if we were working for a larger client, maybe we do a monthly audit or a quarterly audit of a couple of job sites, then we would also recommend that they implement supervisor or superintendent audits that they perform either on a weekly basis. Same as their training, having like a weekly toolbox talk or a daily toolbox talk, and then coming in with the more thorough trainings um, as they're required.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, and best I can remember, OSHA likes to change things, excuse me, every now and then. They like to make a change in policy or regulations. Does that happen a lot, and is it hard for companies to deal with and probably easier for you guys to be proactive with?
Um, I won't say it happens a lot, because it's a very slow process how they promulgate standards into law. So typically you have a fair warning period of when something's up for change. But things do change, and you have to stay current on that. And um, and of course, they also give people time to pipe in about the changes that are going to happen. And they'll go back and forth um, for quite some time before they're actually made into laws. But it is something you have to stay on top of. Right now they're looking at a heat stress standard, which is something that's been talked about for a long time. We know it's a hazard, and we have to do something for people working outdoors, but having a specific standard to cite, and then knowing too that just because there's not a specific standard there, that if there's a known hazard, that they can cite people under the general duty clause, and being aware of that. So just because it's not written as a standard, if you know it's a hazard, you still have to take care of it.
So that sounds like it's more I don't know, more planned and thought out, which is good, which should make it a little easier to keep clients up to speed if regulations change, because at least it's not like willy nilly and that changed and oh my gosh, it's new signs and new this and new policies. So it seems like they kind of go through some steps.
They do, and I mean a good example of that was when the silica standards updated, and that's been some time ago. But they lowered the permissible exposure limit for silica in general industry, and then in construction. But our concrete cutters, they knew it was coming, and so again, as much as they wanted to fight it, they knew that they had to start preparing for that. And that, because it increases the cost for the companies when there's medical surveillance, more personal protective equipment, more documentation, and things like that.
So let's kind of step back and look at some big picture stuff. Some of the most common incidents/accidents that are found on job sites. What do you guys see in your findings?
Number one overall in construction is falls. Always has been, always will be, because people are building up, and that is the number one thing that we see. Number one overall is motor vehicle accidents, and so you have to get all those materials to the job site, and so in the construction side of things, we're right up there with both of those hazards. OSHA has something called the Focus 4, which is what encompasses about probably 65% of their injuries. And again, the number one thing in that is falls. The other categories that fall into that would be electrocutions, caught in betweens, and struck bys, or how they categorize those. And caught in betweens would be things like excavation collapses. Of course, a struck by is getting hit by something, so that would encompass your heavy equipment as well. But falls, and that's for fatalities that we see and severe injuries on construction sites. It's falls. On the manufacturing side of things, we stick falls are number two, and then the caught in betweens and struck bys are typically fall into the categories of machine guarding and lockout when it comes to citations, but which still kind of fall into that Focus 4, even though it's the manufacturing side.
When you go in an audit and you're looking for OSHA violations, is it usually, if you're in a manufacturing environment, is it more machine guarding, or if you're in a construction area, is it more prevention of falls, or what do you see?
Absolutely. On a construction site, I always start my audits with from the top and look at falls are the first thing I look at. And so if we have anybody working at heights, we're going to examine, again, if they're working in scissor lifts, aerial lifts, mobile elevated work platforms, we're going to look at that. If they're anywhere above 6 feet, we're looking for what is that fall protection system? Is it adequate? Are they using it properly? Have they been trained? And has their equipment been inspected? And so that could be guardrails, that could be full body harnesses, anchorage points, which are usually the hardest point of fall protection. Are they adequate as well? So people aren't tying off to something that's not going to support them. and then you kind of work your way down from there. If it's a ground level job, excavations, that would be the next biggest hazard. So can I fall into a hole that's being dug, or is it adequately protected to keep me from getting crushed and collapsed in an excavation? On the manufacturing side of things, lockout is usually the biggest one, and the first program that I'll always lean towards, just because in my experience, all of the fatalities that I've dealt with in manufacturing have been from lockout. So it's people removing machine guards and trying to service something, or people trying to getting inside moving equipment without locking it out. And so that's one of the first things I always look at there. Is there a written program? Are things adequately guarded? Do we have people that are trained properly for that?
I've got about 6 items here we're going to run through, and these are statistics that are fairly recent. And just comment on these statistics. That's a hard word some days. Comment on these and just kind of let me know if you think, yeah, that's right or wrong, or yeah, absolutely, and why. The first one is, according to OSHA, 1 in 5 deaths among U.S. workers happens in the construction industry. Low, high, what do you think?
Sounds about right. Yeah.
The next one, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, falls account for 34% of all construction deaths.
Absolutely. Again, falls number one, and seen it firsthand.
Also, from the BLS, over 60% of construction accidents occur with the employees or within the employee's first year of employment.
I can see that. Untrained people that are not trained properly, and again, younger workers typically that are more likely to take more risk. We tend to accept more risk the younger we are. That fear gene doesn't kick in until we're a little bit older. And again, and that pressure to, like you said before, the pressure to produce, and not realizing the importance of it.
Another one from the BLS, of the 42 annual crane-related deaths, and we didn't touch on this earlier, 60% involves a falling object.
So yeah, that would be the struck by. So again, in that focus 4 that OSHA's grouped, about 65% of the accidents that happen every year, that would be something dropping. And we've had that, I believe it was 2 years ago, a concrete bucket was dropped and crushed somebody. So that's your rigging. Not only the cranes, but having certified riggers that are trained how to properly inspect the rigging, using good equipment, rigging it properly. So a lot that can go wrong with crane operations.
Our number 5 here, according to the National Safety Council, total workplace injury cost exceeds $170 billion a year.
I can believe it. So, not the numbers person, but I can definitely believe it, because just the cost of an injury, and it's sad to say that a fatality costs a company much less than an injury. Because the costs end, unfortunately, with the person's life, but with a severe injury, that cost can continue forever.
And our last one, this is from OSHA. OSHA penalties could cost you anywhere from $13,653 to $136,532 for a safety violation. So that's definitely reason to give you guys a call to prevent that.
Absolutely. So OSHA, the citations have a cost of living increase every year, and so they do continue to go up. That is based on, so the lower of those is based on a serious citation. With those serious citations, if OSHA comes back for a repeat inspection, or it's deemed willful, it increases that 10 times up to that 138,000. Typically, when we go in with somebody if we can fix everything, fix the findings of the citation, do the proper documentation as far as written programs, training, and go to an informal conference, we're typically able to get those numbers down quite a bit. But you think if they compound, if they have 5 serious findings, and typically they don't just find one thing, they find several things wrong, those numbers can get way up there. It's definitely an incentive for management who's looking at the numbers to keep up. You know.
So we'll kind of dig a little deeper on the training side and talk more about the OSHA safety training. What type of skills will a contractor learn if they come in and take your course? And I know you offer a 10 and a 30, I think. So if you could talk about maybe those two courses and what they'll pick up in the initial.
Okay, so the OSHA 10 and 30 hour classes are they're specifically designed by OSHA. The 10-hour is an awareness level course, and so you're going to touch on in a 10-hour construction course an introduction to OSHA, the Focus 4, which covers the items I talked about previously: falls, electrocution, struck-bys, and caught-in-betweens. And then some other topics such as personal protective equipment, health and health hazards, which would hit things like silica. And then there's electives that can be put in there too. The 10-hour, by the time you hit the required topics, you're typically capping out at your 10 hours with just the required materials. The 30-hour is designed more for somebody with some supervisory experience or somebody that you're expecting to be more of a safety leader. So not only do you get come away with the hazard recognition, but you're learning some of the skills to be able to manage safety. And so, like for superintendents, you would always want to go more of a 30-hour type of class is what that would be geared towards. She'll talk about how to manage written programs, the management of safety. We add in some leadership segments into that as well as instead of getting 30 minutes to an hour on a topic, you have more time to actually depending on what their situation is, you meet the minimum requirements, but you may do up to 4 hours on confined spaces in construction if they do a lot of confined space entry. And so there's a little more customization that can be done with that 30-hour class as opposed to the 10. And again, these are awareness, 10-hour awareness level. And a lot of people think that the 10-hour they're going to learn everything that they need to know. And so just because you talk about fall protection in the 10-hour, that's not considered a fall protection class. So if you're deeming somebody a competent person, just having a 10-hour is probably not adequate training. They need to also go through a 4, maybe 6-hour fall protection class. Scaffolding is a huge one as well in construction, where we see a lot of falls and injuries. And again, if somebody's going to be your scaffolding competent person, they're going to learn awareness level in the 10-hour, but you're going to want them to take a 6 or an 8-hour scaffolding. In my opinion, you can't be overtrained. And with safety, a lot of times people are like, oh, this is so repetitive. We've done this, every job site we go on, we have to do the same thing in the orientation. But eventually, after you hear something about 15 times, it finally sticks. So.
Now, I'm curious now about instructors. So who is teaching these more pinpointed classes and their background and work experience? Where does that come from?
Well, it just depends. So for our team here, I think all of our employees, I think all of them are OSHA 10 and 30 instructors for construction. We have 2 instructors that are OSHA 30 for general industry as well. And then for the more, and we all have different backgrounds. So we have instructors that come from concrete construction, from the crane industry, from general industry. And it's like my background was general industry, but I love teaching the construction courses. So, so we come from all walks of life. I have someone that came from, worked in a manufacturing facility that built ships and boats and things like that. So very diverse backgrounds. And one of the things with consulting is we go everywhere. And so going places from, again, shipyards to large construction sites, small renovations, we see a little bit of everything.
Hey, we hope you're enjoying our show, and if you are, we would appreciate it if you would help us out. Crush that like button, hit the subscribe, and be sure notifications are on so you'll be notified whenever we release a new podcast, guide, or compilation. We appreciate the support, and now let's get back to the show. So I assume when they finish up a course, they get a nice certificate, and how does that help them going forward?
Absolutely. So if it's an OSHA 10 or 30 class, that's submitted, and your card actually comes from the Department of Labor. It's a card that says OSHA. Those are good forever for the construction and general industry. The maritime cards, they have an expiration date. That's not one that we do here. We don't have much call for maritime, but and it shows somebody that you have a safety background. And what we are seeing now with some of the trade schools and things like that is they are starting to offer 10-hour classes that these kids are coming out of these trade schools with an OSHA 10, which just shows that they have had some safety background, some safety awareness, and which is a really good thing. Because I know back in the day when I was in high school, if you went to trade school, there wasn't much focus on safety really. So
let's say for an OSHA inspection, they've called you, they know it's coming,
okay.
and how do you get them ready?
So for an OSHA inspection, the main things we want to see first is documentation. So do you have written programs? Because what OSHA wants to see is that what are you saying you're gonna do, and are you doing that? And so are you walking that walk? And so the example I use a lot is when you pull up to a construction site, there's a gate and there's a big sign. And that sign shows the PPE man. And he has on his hard hat, his safety glasses, his high-vis vest, his boots, and his gloves. And so OSHA sees, okay, they've done a hazard assessment. They've determined this is what I need to protect myself on this site. When they walk through the gate, if nobody's wearing this PPE, then what's the disconnect? And so that's going to make them dig deeper, because you've told me that I need these things to protect myself, yet you're not wearing it. And so that's the same thing with the program. So there's certain things that OSHA tells us we have to do, but in many cases it's, have we performed that hazard assessment and looked at the hierarchy of controls to be able to say, can we get rid of these hazards? Can we eliminate them? Are there controls that we can put in place to minimize them? And are we doing those things? And so that's usually the first thing is, so the documentation, the programs. Have we trained our people? And so are they, the people that are doing these, have we given them an orientation to the site? Have we trained them why they need to wear their personal protective equipment? Fall protection training, of course, if they're in excavations, confined space, all of those are specific trainings that they would need to have. And then the site walkthrough, and that's looking at housekeeping. Housekeeping is number one, general industry and construction, the first thing I look at, because if you walk through and the site's clean, it tells you a lot about their safety and how that job site's being run. If you walk in and there's debris everywhere and big piles of wood and nails and just general trash, you know that it's not being run efficiently, when those things are happening.
And you're already, let's take a client you're already working with, and you've gotten everything going for them, and they're implementing, and things are going well, and they have an accident, and OSHA's coming to check it out. Do you guys sometimes get called to come support them with that audit?
Oh, absolutely. And so we will come. We actually have an app that we use. So if OSHA is on site or somebody has an incident, that it will locate our representative that is closest to them, and we will come on site again and assist them through the whole process if necessary, and if they want us there, of course. And with that, again, it can, depending on the severity of the incident, it may be the course of several days as well. And so we'll perform an incident investigation alongside, again, if it's a GC or the contractor. and help with that, help with making the calls to OSHA. So again, in certain case, in a fatality, you have to call within 8 hours. Other types of severe injuries, hospitalizations, you have to call within 24 hours. So we can assist with making those calls. And again, going through the whole process, helping with the documentation, um, anything that they might need to get through that process. And again, a lot of times, with multi-employer sites, it can get a little bit confusing as to who accepts responsibility. And again, even with the big GCs, whenever anything happens on their site, of course, they want it fully investigated and reporting up to them as to what's going on, and helping to determine whose responsibility it is to accept that injury on their OSHA logs as well.
And I assume they still do the random inspections where they schedule those. I assume there's still investigations or inspections done when, let's say, one of your own employees contacts them and says, "Hey, I don't think this is a safe situation."
Absolutely. So the reasons that OSHA may come to a job site, again, their first priority is something that may cause a severe injury, and the for the fatality, they have to follow up on all fatalities or high hazard hospitalizations, things like that have happened, amputations, loss of an eye. Typically, they will do that in person. All fatalities are going to get a thorough investigation. Sometimes amputations and hospitalizations, they may not follow up in person, but a lot of times they will. Their priority for inspections is going to move from there to any employees that call in and report safety violations. Those are all followed up on as well. Again, sometimes it's just a letter received, depending on what the hazard is that's presented, but they are followed up on. And then the emphasis programs bring a lot of OSHA inspectors out as well. And so for the construction industry, I'd have to look and see what they are right now, but typically there's always an emphasis program on powered industrial trucks. So a facility that just has forklifts, falls, stays there all the time. And so they can any construction site would be open for that type of emphasis program, because you drive by, you see somebody working at heights, right? And so again, all of those inspections, and then the programmed inspections at random are kind of at the lower end of the list. By the time they get through just keeping up with the calls and follow up on all of these other things. And then lastly, repeat inspections. So those high dollars, that 138,000, and and these huge, 100,000 monetary citations that you see, that those typically come from repeat inspections, where they follow up on previously cited um, um, workplaces, and they come back and they see the same things, and these people get repeat and willful citations. You definitely don't want to be in those categories.
So, what are some of the steps these contractors need to take to prepare long term for all these types of inspections?
Basically, good documentation, good written programs, training, maintaining that documentation where they can track it and access it, and site inspections. And so, just making sure that their people are reminded that they need to do things properly. And again, building that safety culture where it's embedded in them to do the right thing, and that they know that the companies aren't going to accept shortcuts, and that they're going to follow the safety programs. And a lot of times that means having a very strict disciplinary policy, and not being afraid to let people go if they're not going to adapt the appropriate safety culture. And unfortunately, that's what it comes down to sometimes. So, I mean, we can coach people, we can warn people, we can write them up, but some people don't accept that. And it's hard to understand why somebody wouldn't accept something that's going to keep them alive and safe. But it comes down to that, and companies have to protect themselves from people that aren't willing to fall into that safety culture.
Okay. So let's talk real quickly about OSHA citation defense. Tell us about that process, starting with what's the first thing you should do when you get a citation.
So when you get a citation, the first thing you should do is, one, make sure that everything has been corrected. All right. And you want to contact, depending on the situation, if you have brought in counsel, and again, in fatality situations, we'll almost always recommend that somebody have legal counsel. For other citations, again, we will, you want to review it with your safety consultant or your safety manager. If you feel like you need guidance, that's where we come in, is to help advise you on that. If you can show that you have closed out everything, so you have the written programs, you have the training, you have the photos and receipts to show that you've made the corrections that were required, you want to schedule that informal conference. You have 15 days to do that. And in that informal conference, you want to go in and be able to show, hey, this is what all we've done. You take your documentation with you and show them. And that's one of the things we're really good at, is outlining all those steps, taking those citations and outlining all the things that we have done to correct it. And take that time to present that to your area director and let them know that, it was unfortunate, if it was an accident, that this accident happened, and having a higher, somebody high level management, owners with you to show their commitment that, hey, we've hired this safety consultant, we've made all of these improvements, we've made this investment. We don't want this to ever happen again, thank you for pointing out our deficiencies. This is what we've done to correct it. And that will go a long way. And a lot of times at that point, they will make a recommendation to reduce the penalties, and you can make an agreement at that point. Once it goes above and beyond that, if you choose to contest the citation, that's where we're going to recommend that we get the lawyers involved. And sometimes we will be able to contest some of the smaller things, or get them to group violations, where if maybe you had 4 electrical citations, that we get them to ask them to group it. Or if we can show that, that something doesn't meet the standard, then a lot of times we can get things removed. And we've seen things go totally away, get the citations removed. We've seen them reduce as much as 40 to 50% as well. No promises, but
Right. Right.
no promises, but sometimes if you're willing to work with OSHA, and they'll work with you. You want to put that money back into your safety program, not give it to them.
Worksite analysis, that's a big important thing. How does that work into your training?
We can help people with learning, like whatever you want to call your hazard analysis process, JSA, JHA. Part of, again, in the 30-hour training, that's one of the things that we focus on, one of the topics, and just helping people to look at those hazards, what are the controls to prevent them, and putting that into process. And again, with our audits as well, we're not just going out there, okay, and taking a picture of somebody that's not tied off properly and saying, okay, and then you get a report 3 days later. It's like, hey, getting the superintendent, hey, we've got a problem over here. This guy's, that's a high hazard potential. Let's get this fixed. Let's make him safe. Instead of just kind of, documenting deficiencies. We want to be the coaches out there. Yeah.
Do you find that companies are not empowering their people who are actually doing the work? And we're probably not talking as much construction here as manufacturing. They're not empowering those hourly people to bring things forward. Or are you seeing the shift where they are doing that more? That we want them to come forward and identify this stuff ahead of time?
To be honest, we see both. And so, it depends on the mentality of the leadership and the ownership in the company. And again, if they're production driven, a lot of times they're still taking those shortcuts and not empowering their people. The companies that are doing it right and seeing success are empowering their people. And again, and that's through the written programs, having observations, having safety committees, having suggest and bringing those line workers into those, not just management safety committee meetings where it's the owner and the safety manager and and a couple of managers, where it's actually those line employees that are taking an active role in that safety committee and being empowered to do that. And it really does go a long way for building that safety culture and that buy-in, when they feel like they can make a suggestion and then they see it being implemented. And if it can't be implemented, at least they get communication as to why, hey, we've looked into this in the past and this is what we found, why it's not a feasible solution, because sometimes there's other reasons, not just monetary reasons, but reasons why some things don't work that employees may have in their mind that they think will.
Well, I'm going to pass some free advice to everybody listening today. And I know a lot of you are contractors and this is construction, but I think this works everywhere. If you will empower those employees in every facet of your business, quality, your manufacturing processes, they're not engineers, but they are doing that job every day, day in, day out. And they might have an idea to make it a little better. They might have an idea how to get rid of that quality problem that you're fighting from the other end. So empower those employees and give them ownership, give them a voice. Don't ask for just their hands, ask for their heart and their head and get it all. And don't waste your money just paying for their hands and fingers, because so many places do that. If they would just get people involved, they would really see a big change in safety, in quality, in everything.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And they have the best advice, for improving safety, because just like you said, they're in there, they're doing it every day, and they know. You just got to ask.
Any type of consulting or courses that you guys do specifically for those heavy equipment operators or that type of work?
We do lots of training, so would be the main things: excavation training. If we're digging, steel erections, part of the OSHA. All of this is part of the 10 and 30s. The steel erection, mechanical, any type of mechanized equipment, as well as part of that. So, and the awareness training for everybody on the job site when it comes to working around this type of equipment, to again, knowing when you're visible, knowing to stay out of the way, so that you don't get run over.
Now, off the top of your head, not putting you on the spot, what is the biggest safety tip you would give for operating heavy equipment?
Oh, for heavy equipment, be seen and be loud, so people know where you are. If you're the operator or you're working around it, and that's the main thing. People get run over, get backed over, and again, knowing the bigger that equipment, the less visibility they have, and and that's more for the people around it than the operator. But that's what I see as the biggest hazard. So. And I've seen some people, really implement some very stringent powered industrial truck policies. We're putting halos on them, where and making their policies as stringent as, if you step into the light frame, it's a disciplinary action. So and it's a serious thing. So that's one of the emphasis programs that stays out there, is powered industrial trucks, because they are so hazardous and a very necessary tool. We're glad we have them, but we have to use that caution and make sure our operators are trained, and our people that work around them are trained.
Right. Now, talking about the different equipment, if you have a client that is highly crane oriented, would their consulting be a lot different than somebody that's working with excavators, or are there a lot of similarities?
I would say there's a lot of similarities. Of course, the crane operator training is a very specialized training now. So when the crane standards updated, and we don't do that training, so we would send them to a specialist for that, as far as the operator. But anybody working around it and the rigging, we do a lot of qualified rigger signal training for the people working around the crane.
Just off the top of your head, what's the most important training tip related to cranes that you would recommend?
If you're not actively involved in rigging, stay as far away as possible. All right. Never, and not getting under a suspended load. So the biggest thing. and because we see it, and you preach it all day long. So
As far as regular safety meetings, daily toolbox talks, etc. I'm sure you guys really encourage that with your clients.
oh, absolutely. And for a lot of our clients, we actually do their safety meetings. So we will come 5:45 in the morning. Here we come, and it may just be a 15-minute talk. Uh, Once a month for some clients, but then of course we encourage them to also, and if they have larger, like a lot of the clients will have a larger safety meeting where they bring everybody in once a month, and then they'll do daily or weekly toolbox talks as well. And of course, some things have gone virtual now. I'll sit in with the safety meetings for a lot of clients as well virtually, um, just to be able to take part in that and add in as well.
Do you find that the seriousness in the safety meetings has increased over the past few years? That people are taking it a lot more serious, or is it about the same?
I think they do, and I think it again depends on the client and depends on the safety culture with them. But if management takes it serious, then the employees will take it serious.
Well, on a final note, and this is a very sincere note, and you're probably aware of this too, we're in what's being called the resignation era right now. A record amount of people are voluntarily leaving their jobs. Over 4.5 million walked off their jobs in November. So, how does that affect you guys? How do you guys feel about that?
It's we see it in all of our industry, all of the clients that we work with. Manufacturing is hard hit, construction is hard hit with that. And again, as clients are bringing in new people with a revolving door, it's very easy to get behind on the training. And so that's one of the things that they really have to stay on top of. And you know, recruiting is hard for everybody. They also have to be very cautious on the manufacturing side with temporary employees and making sure they have good contracts in place, how they're going to share the training of those employees as well. If you're bringing in day labor and things like that, you can't just expose somebody that's not aware of the hazards to a construction site. So they have to have that training.
Well, Shannon, I appreciate all your insight. A ton of information here for the viewers, and I appreciate it. Some really good insight. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know you guys are busy, and we appreciate it so much.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.